The man made of ice, the city never truly slept, but at 4 in the morning, Manhattan held its breath. Jameson Cross stood alone in his corner office on the 53rd floor, watching headlights trace patterns through the pre-dawn darkness below. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, a face that had forgotten how to soften. Forbes called him the Iron Prince of Finance. His competitors called him ruthless. The truth lived somewhere between reputation and reality. In a space he had built deliberately, and brick by careful brick, Nina Hartley arrived at 5 every morning, an hour before anyone else. She moved through the executive suite like a ghost, preparing his world before he had to face it. Coffee at precisely 185 degrees. Files arranged chronologically, then by priority. The temperature adjusted to 68 degrees because anything warmer made him restless. She understood patterns others missed. The incident that changed everything. Elevator malfunction happened on a Tuesday. Nina stepped inside, carrying her usual morning load. His schedule printed on cream cardstock, leather portfolio, and her grandmother's old thermos filled with chamomile tea. Jameson entered 3 seconds later, phone pressed to his ear. Already deep in a conversation about overseas markets, the car lurched between floors 31 and 32 and stopped. The lights flickered once before settling into an emergency glow that made everything look pale and unreal. Jameson's conversation cut off mid-sentence. His hand found the wall, fingers spreading wide against the metal panel. Nina watched his chest rise and fall in rhythms that grew faster, shallower. She recognized panic when she saw it, even in a man famous for having none. "Mr. Cross," she said quietly, setting down her things. "Look at me." His eyes found hers, and for the first time in 3 years of working together, she saw past the armor. His pupils were wide, his skin had gone pale, and his breath came in sharp gasps that he tried desperately to control. "Breathe with me," she continued, her voice steady as stone. "In through your nose for 4 counts, hold for 4, out through your mouth for 6. She counted aloud, her rhythm unwavering. When his breathing remained ragged, she did something that would have shocked anyone who knew their strictly professional relationship. She took his hand. His palm was cold and damp. She held it firmly, grounding him with pressure and warmth. "You're safe," she said. "We're between floors, but we're not falling. The emergency system is working. Help is already coming. Right now, all you need to do is breathe." The emergency intercom crackled. Nina explained their situation calmly while keeping one hand on Jameson's arm. The response promised rescue within 20 minutes. She pulled out her thermos and poured tea into the small cup. The steam rose between them, carrying the scent of chamomile and honey. "My grandmother used to make this," she said, offering it to him. "She said it was good for settling storms, inside and out." Jameson took it with hands that had steadied slightly. He drank without commenting on the break-in protocol, without noting that executives did not share thermoses with their secretaries. Nina reached into her pocket and pulled out a small card. On it, written in her neat handwriting, was a single word: breathe. "Keep these," she explained, placing it on the elevator panel where he could see it. Sometimes we forget the simplest things when everything feels complicated. The unraveling the elevator restarted after 18 minutes. By then, Jameson's color had returned, his breathing had normalized, and the Iron Prince facade had begun rebuilding itself. But something had shifted in the space between floors. In the quiet vulnerability that Nina had witnessed and protected, that afternoon she found a package on her desk. Inside was a leather journal, expensive but understated, with a note in handwriting she recognized from signed documents. "For someone who remembers what matters, J.C." Denver Cole noticed the change before anyone else. As CFO and Jameson's friend since college, he had watched his friend build walls for 15 years, ever since Blake's death. Now those walls showed cracks. "You're distracted," Denver observed during a strategy meeting. "That's not like you." Jameson's gaze drifted to the outer office where Nina worked, her head bent over paperwork, completely focused. "She saw me break," he said quietly, "and she didn't use it." Denver followed his gaze. "Nina's solid. Always has been. But Jim, you know the rules. HR policies exist for reasons. I know. Jameson's jaw tightened. I'm not crossing lines. But the truth was more complicated. In the days following the elevator incident, he found himself noticing details he had overlooked for years. The way Nina tilted her head when solving problems. How she took her coffee black, but kept cream in the break room for others. The small kindnesses she extended without expecting recognition. 2. Worlds colliding, Nina's life existed in careful balance. 5 days in Manhattan, living in a studio apartment that cost too much for too little space. Weekends in Millbrook Cove, Maine, where her mother Rita struggled with arthritis in a house that needed repairs they could not afford. The town library where Rita had worked for 30 years faced closure. The community center needed a new roof. These were problems that money could solve. But Nina had learned long ago that pride mattered more than charity to people like her mother Vanessa. Pierce entered Jameson's office without knocking. A privilege she assumed from years of professional rivalry turned complicated friendship. She wore ambition like perfume, strong enough to announce her presence before she spoke. I hear you had an incident, she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Elevator malfunction. How terrifying. Jameson's expression revealed nothing. It was handled by your secretary. Vanessa's smile sharpened. How fortunate. Though I suppose that raises questions about boundaries, doesn't it? The great Jameson Cross, rescued by the help. Nina is not the help, he replied, his voice carrying an edge that made Vanessa pause. And there were no boundaries crossed. Not yet, Vanessa said softly. But everyone knows your vow, Jim. After Blake died, you swore you would never let anyone close enough to hurt you again. You built an empire on that promise. What happens when someone finds a crack in the foundation? After she left, Jameson stood at his window, watching the city that never questioned his armor. Vanessa was right about the vow. After losing Blake to a sailing accident, after watching his family shatter from grief, he had decided that control was safer than connection. But Nina had not asked for control. She had offered something simpler and more dangerous. She had offered to see him as human, the first gesture on Friday evening. As Nina prepared to leave for Maine, she found an envelope on her desk. Inside was a check made out to the Millbrook Cove Community Fund, enough to fix the library roof and restore the community center, the note read. Sometimes storms need more than breathing exercises. Let me help with this one. Nina stared at the check, her throat tight. She had never mentioned Millbrook Cove's struggles to Jameson, which meant he had paid attention to details even she thought she had kept private. She found him still in his office. Jacket off, sleeves rolled up, looking more human than Titan. I can't accept this, she said. Holding out the envelope? It's not for you, Jameson replied without looking up from his computer. It's for a community that matters. Consider it an investment in infrastructure. Why? He finally met her eyes. Because you were kind when you didn't have to be. Because you held my hand in an elevator and didn't make me feel weak for needing it. Because some debts aren't about money. Nina, they're about recognizing when someone sees you, really sees you, and chooses grace over judgment. The words hung between them, honest and unguarded. Nina set the envelope on his desk. Then match it through the company foundation. Make it official. Make it right. Jameson smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. Deal. As Nina left for her train, she felt the weight of something beginning. Not a romance that would shatter against corporate policies and public scrutiny, but a recognition that some connections refused to follow rules. Behind his desk, Jameson touched the small card that still sat in his pocket. Breathe, it said. For the first time in 15 years, he felt like he could. The city lights glittered below, different to the small human moment happening 53 floors above the street. But in that moment, the Iron Prince felt his armor crack a little wider, and instead of fear, he felt something closer to hope. Worlds apart, Millbrook Cove existed in a different time zone than Manhattan, not by hours but by heartbeat. Here mornings arrived with fishing boats and the cry of gulls instead of taxi horns and subway rumbles. Nina stood on the weathered dock behind her childhood home. Watching fog lift off the water like curtains opening on a familiar stage, Rita Hartley sat in the kitchen. Her swollen knuckles wrapped around a mug of coffee she had taken 10 minutes to pour. Pride kept her from asking for help. Love kept Nina from waiting to be asked. "The library board meeting is Tuesday," Rita said, watching her daughter organize pill bottles by day and time. "They're talking about selling the building to developers. Condos, probably. Vacation rentals for people from away." Nina's jaw tightened. The library had been Rita's second home for 3 decades. She had taught children to read there, had shelved books with hands that now struggled to hold them. "We have options now," Nina said carefully. The community fund received a significant donation, enough for repairs and operating costs for 2 years. Rita's eyes narrowed with the particular suspicion of a woman who had raised a daughter alone on a librarian's salary. From where? An anonymous donor through a corporate foundation? "It's legitimate, Mom. I verified everything." The truth sat heavier than the lie. Jameson's match donation had come through official channels, complete with board approval and tax documentation. But Nina knew the source, knew the hand that had signed the authorization, knew the reason behind it, the careful dance back in Manhattan. Jameson found himself doing something unprecedented, leaving the office at 6 o'clock. Denver nearly dropped his coffee when he saw his friend with a briefcase instead of plans to work until midnight. "Who are you, and what have you done with Jameson Cross?" Denver asked, following him to the elevator. "I have a dinner meeting," Jameson replied, which was technically true. He was meeting himself for dinner, alone, in an apartment that usually only saw him sleeping, with Nina. Denver's tone carried warning and concern in equal measure. Jameson stopped walking. "She's in Maine, with her mother. But you're thinking about her?" It was not a question. The elevator doors opened. Jameson stepped inside, then held the door with one hand. Blake used to say that the worst kind of coward is the one who's afraid of being happy. I spent 15 years proving him right. Blake also sailed into a storm because he was too stubborn to wait it out, Denver said softly. "Sometimes fear is wisdom, Jim." The doors closed between them, leaving Jameson alone with his reflection in the polished steel. He looked tired, not from work, but from the constant effort of maintaining walls that someone had already found a way through, the bridging of distance. Nina's phone rang Tuesday evening while she helped her mother prepare dinner. Jameson's name on the screen made her heart perform a complicated maneuver she refused to acknowledge. "Mr. Cross," she answered, stepping onto the back porch, where ocean wind carried away the intimacy of first names. "Nina." His voice sounded different outside the office, less armored. "I hope I'm not interrupting. It's dinner preparations." "Is something wrong?" "No, He paused, and she heard traffic in the background. "I wanted to know how the library board meeting went." Nina leaned against the porch railing, watching sunset paint the water in shades of copper and rose. "They voted to keep it open. The fund secured 2 years of operation." "People cried, Mr. Cross. Grown men who've lived here their whole lives cried with relief." Jameson," he said quietly. "When we're not in the office, I'm just Jameson." The correction felt dangerous and necessary. "Jameson," she repeated, testing the weight of his name without the buffer of formality. "I'm glad it worked out." She heard something shift in his voice, vulnerability creeping past corporate smooth. "Nina, I need to tell you something. After Blake died, I made a promise to myself. No attachments, no weaknesses, no one close enough to destroy me the way losing him did." Nina's throat tightened. She had suspected the walls had a foundation story, but hearing it made them more real and more fragile. "That's not living," she said gently. "That's just existing between disasters." "I know." The admission carried weight. "But knowing and changing are different countries. I don't have a map for this." Behind her, through the kitchen window, Nina watched her mother move slowly, carefully, through the ritual of making soup. Rita had loved and lost too, had been abandoned by a man who decided fatherhood was too heavy a burden. Yet she had not built walls. She had built a daughter instead. "Maybe we don't need a map," Nina offered. "Maybe we just need to be honest about where we are and where we're willing to go." The complication Vanessa Pierce's article appeared in the Financial Times on Wednesday morning. The headline read, "Has the Iron Prince found his weakness?" The photograph showed Jameson and Nina leaving Cross Industries together, her carrying files, him holding the door. An innocent moment twisted into speculation. The piece was clever, never directly stating anything actionable, but implying everything. It mentioned the elevator incident, the Millbrook Cove donation, the unusual sight of Jameson Cross leaving work before dark. It resurrected his famous vow and questioned whether a secretary had succeeded where business rivals had failed. Nina read it in the break room, her coffee growing cold in her hands. Around her, colleagues whispered and glanced. Some looks held curiosity, others judgment, a few carried barely concealed envy. Denver arrived at her desk before 9. "HR wants to see you," he said quietly. "Nina, I'm sorry. Protocol requires investigation when these rumors surface." "I haven't done anything wrong," she said, but her voice shook slightly. She had worked too hard, come too far from a town where opportunity was scarce, to have it reduced to gossip and speculation.
I know.
But appearance matters in this world. Fair or not, true or not, the story is out there now. The HR meeting was professional and humiliating in equal measure. Questions about her relationship with Jameson, about the donation, about whether she had leveraged her position inappropriately. She answered everything honestly. But honesty felt like stripping armor in front of strangers. Jameson found her afterwards in the small conference room where she sat alone. Staring at her hands, "This is my fault," he said, closing the door behind him. "I should have been more careful. We were careful." Nina's voice was steady, despite the tremor she felt inside. "We followed every rule. But it doesn't matter, does it? People see what they want to see." He sat across from her, the polished table between them, a metaphor for everything that kept them apart. "I can fix this. A statement. Legal action against the paper. Whatever it takes. You can't fix perception, Jameson. You can only control your response to it." She met his eyes, seeing the frustration and helplessness there. "The question is, what are we actually doing? Is this worth the cost?" The choice at the crossroads that night, Nina sat in her apartment, a resignation letter half written on her laptop. Pride demanded it. Self-preservation recommended it. But something stronger resisted. Her mother called at 10. "I read the article," Rita said without preamble. "Someone sent me a link. Mom, it's not what they're implying. I know my daughter. I know her integrity." Rita's voice carried the particular strength of women who had survived storms. "But I also know that sometimes the right thing and the safe thing are different paths." "Which one are you walking?" Nina closed her laptop. "I don't know anymore. And let me tell you what I learned when your father left. He chose the safe thing, the easy thing, running away when life got complicated. I chose the right thing, raising you alone, fighting for every piece of dignity we had. One of us sleeps well at night, baby. It's not him." The resignation letter remained unfinished. The grand gesture, Friday afternoon. Jameson called an emergency board meeting. Nina was not invited, but Denver brought her the news afterwards, his expression caught between concern and admiration. He addressed the rumors directly, Denver explained. Acknowledged that he values you, respects you, and has absolute faith in your professional integrity. Then he announced he's establishing clear protocols. "You'll report directly to me going forward." With complete autonomy over the Millbrook Cove Foundation project, he's removing himself from any supervisory role. Nina's chest tightened. "He's protecting me. He's protecting both of you." "But Nina, there's more." Denver handed her an envelope. "He's also doing something I never thought I'd see." The side was a formal proposal. The Millbrook Cove Foundation would become a permanent entity, with Nina as executive director. The position came with a salary that would allow her to split time between Maine and New York, to care for her mother while building something meaningful. But the final page held the real revelation. Jameson had purchased the old lighthouse keeper's cottage on the point, the one that had sat empty for years. The deed was in Nina's name, with a simple note: "Everyone needs a place where they can breathe. This one comes with an ocean view and no strings attached." The storm before peace. Nina drove to Millbrook Cove that night, arriving near midnight. The lighthouse cottage sat dark against the starlit sky, waves crashing steady against rocks below. She used the key Denver had given her, stepping into a space that smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Jameson had not just bought a house. He had bought her a choice. Stay in New York and accept the complicated dance of corporate politics and whispered rumors. Return to Maine and build something lasting. Or find a way to do both. On her own terms, the lighthouse beams swept across the water every 15 seconds. Steady, reliable, persistent. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jameson. "I know you're there. The caretaker told me someone arrived. I'm not asking you to choose me, Nina. I'm asking you to choose yourself. Whatever that looks like, I'll respect it. But know this. You changed something in me that I thought was permanent. You proved that walls can have doors. Whether you walk through one, toward me, or away from me. I'll be grateful you existed in my life at all." Nina stood at the window, watching the lighthouse rhythm, thinking about the man who had given her choices instead of demands, who had protected her reputation at the cost of proximity, who had somehow understood that the greatest gift was not possession, but freedom. The return Monday morning. Nina walked into Cross Industries with her shoulders back and her decision made. She found Jameson in his office earlier than even his usual early arrival, looking like a man who had not slept well in days. "I'm taking the position," she said without preamble. "Executive Director of the Millbrook Cove Foundation? I'll split my time, 3 days in Maine, 2 in New York, with flexibility for both." Relief flooded his face before he could mask it. "That's good. That's really good. But there are conditions." Nina stepped closer, her voice steady. "We do this right. Complete transparency, clear boundaries when I'm here in a professional capacity. Absolute honesty about what we're building. No secrets, no shortcuts, no pretending this is simple when it's not." "Agreed." Jameson stood, moving around his desk but maintaining respectful distance. "Nina, I need you to understand something. When I made that vow after Blake died, I believed it. I believed that caring about anyone was weakness, that isolation was strength. You didn't just prove me wrong. You showed me I'd been confusing survival with living. And now?" she asked softly. "Now I want to try living. With you, if you'll have me. Not as boss and secretary, not tangled in corporate hierarchy, but as two people who found each other in a stalled elevator and decided that kindness matters more than armor." Nina closed the distance between them, her hand finding his. "Then let's try. Carefully, honestly, with our eyes open to every complication. Starting when?" His fingers tightened around hers. "Starting now. But first, I need coffee. And you need to call HR and make sure every policy is documented and every protocol is followed. We're not giving anyone ammunition." Jameson laughed, a sound she had heard so rarely it felt like discovering a new color. "Practical, even in romance." "Someone has to be," she replied, but she was smiling too. Building in public view, the transition was not smooth. Vanessa Pierce published a follow-up article, this one more openly critical. Board members questioned the foundation's independence. Employees gossiped in break rooms and elevator rides, but Jameson and Nina built anyway. They established the Millbrook Cove Foundation with a board of community members, complete financial transparency, and quarterly public reports. Nina hired locally, trained residents for positions, and created sustainable programs that would outlast any single donor's interest. Denver became their unexpected advocate. In board meetings, he defended the foundation's integrity with numbers and outcomes. In quieter moments, he told Jameson what he needed to hear. Blake would have liked her. He would have liked who you are when you're with her. Rita's health improved, with better medication the foundation's health insurance provided. She volunteered at the library, teaching children to read the way she had taught Nina. When she met Jameson for the first time, she studied him with eyes that had assessed many men and found most wanting. "My daughter has good instincts," Rita said finally. "But if you hurt her, Mr. Cross, all your money won't protect you from a mother's wrath." Jameson, who had faced down hostile boardrooms and corporate raiders without flinching, nodded seriously. "Understood, ma'am." The test 6 months into the Foundation's operation, a crisis hit. One of Cross Industries' ships encountered trouble in a storm off the coast of Maine. The crew was safe. A cargo was lost and environmental concerns arose. Media descended on Millbrook Cove, and suddenly Nina's position looked like conflict of interest. Jameson wanted to handle it personally. Nina insisted on protocol. He would deal with corporate response. She would address community concerns. And they would maintain separation even as the storm raged around them. "This is exactly what people feared," Vanessa said on a news segment. Personal relationships, compromising professional judgment. Can we really trust that Cross Industries will face appropriate accountability when the executive director of the local foundation shares his bed? Nina watched the broadcast from the foundation office, her jaw tight. Jameson called immediately. "Let me fix this," he said. "By doing what? Hiding me? Hiding us?" "That's not fixing, Jameson. That's retreating. Then what do you suggest?" Nina looked out at the harbor where cleanup crews worked under Foundation supervision, where community members volunteered alongside Cross Industries employees, where actual relationships had been built over months of honest work. Tell the truth. We show the receipts. Every decision, every dollar, every policy that kept us separate when we needed to be. We let the work speak for itself. The press conference was Nina's idea. She stood before cameras and reporters, Jameson deliberately absent, and walked through every foundation decision made since the spill. She showed how community board members had voted on cleanup approaches. She presented independent environmental assessments. She demonstrated that the foundation had actually pushed Cross Industries harder than any outside agency, because integrity mattered more than comfort. "Now, you want to question my relationship with Jameson Cross?" she said directly to the camera. "Question it. Examine it. But while you're digging for scandal, look at what we've actually built. Look at the jobs created, the environmental standards exceeded, the community strengthened. Our relationship hasn't compromised this work. It's made both of us better at doing it." The footage went viral. Not the scandal Vanessa had hoped for, but something more powerful. Authenticity in a world starving for it. The lighthouse principle 3 weeks later. On a clear autumn evening, Jameson stood with Nina on the lighthouse cottage deck. Below them, the ocean performed its eternal rhythm against rocks that had withstood centuries of storms. "I've been thinking about lighthouses," Jameson said, his arm around her waist. "They're not there to stop the storm. They're there to guide people through it." Is this a metaphor? Nina leaned into him, comfortable in the warmth they had built together. "Maybe Blake died because he tried to conquer a storm instead of respecting it. I survived by hiding from all weather. But you taught me something different. You taught me that the point isn't to control the storm or hide from it. It's to be a steady light for each other while it passes." Nina turned in his arms, her hands on his chest, where she could feel his heartbeat steady and sure. "We've had our share of storms." "We have, and we'll have more." We tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture tender and familiar. "But I'm not afraid anymore. Not of loss, not of love, not of what people say or think. I'm only afraid of going back to that elevator where I couldn't breathe. Except this time you're not there with your chamomile tea and your impossible kindness. I'll always be there," Nina promised. "In whatever form we need. Secretary, foundation director, partner, friend. The labels matter less than the truth underneath them." "And what's the truth?" She smiled, the expression carrying everything they had built and survived. That everyone was wrong. You always had a heart, Jameson Cross. You just needed someone to prove it was worth the risk of using it. The beginning a year after the elevator incident, Cross Industries announced a major restructuring. Jameson stepped back from day-to-day operations. Appointing Denver as CEO, he took the title of chairman, but spent most of his time on a new venture, the Cross Foundation for Coastal Communities. With pilot programs in towns like Millbrook Cove across the country, Nina expanded her role. Traveling to help other communities build sustainable futures, she and Jameson found rhythm in their complexity. Professional partners in foundation work, personal partners in life. Always conscious of boundaries, but no longer afraid of crossing them when it mattered. The old lighthouse keeper's cottage became their refuge. On Friday evenings, they would drive north together, leaving behind glass towers for rocky shores. There, they were just two people who had found each other in a stalled elevator and decided that breathing together was better than breathing alone. Rita's arthritis stabilized with proper treatment. The Millbrook Cove Library thrived, adding a community technology center funded by the foundation. Children learned to read in rooms Rita had helped save, creating futures she would never see but had helped make possible. Vanessa Pierce eventually moved on to other targets, their scandals. Her article about them remained online, a reminder that public perception is rarely accurate and frequently unfair. But it also served as proof that some relationships survive scrutiny, not by hiding, but by being exactly what they claim to be. On the anniversary of that morning in the elevator, Nina gave Jameson a gift, a framed card with a single word written in her handwriting. "Breathe," it said. He hung it in his office. This man who had sworn never to love, who had built an empire on isolation, who had been certain that walls were safer than windows. Every day he looked at that word and remembered the moment everything changed. The moment when a secretary saw through steel to find a human heart still beating, still capable, still worth the risk. Everyone knew the billionaire had no heart. Nina said that evening as they watched the lighthouse beams sweep across darkening water, they were wrong. Jameson pulled her closer, breathing in the salt air and the peace they had fought so hard to build. They were wrong about a lot of things, but they were right about one. "What's that?" "That you changed everything," kissed her forehead, a gesture that had become their signature, intimate without being performative. "You proved them wrong by proving I was worth the effort. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve that faith." The lighthouse beams swept past them again. 15 seconds of light followed by darkness, then light again. Steady, persistent, faithful. Together, they had become each other's lighthouse. Not eliminating storms, but guiding each other through them. Not promising perfection, but offering presence. Not building walls, but opening doors. And in a world that often confused power with worth, isolation with strength, they had discovered a simpler truth, that the most revolutionary act is allowing yourself to be seen. To be vulnerable, to be human. The Iron Prince had fallen. But in falling, he had learned to fly.